Herzlich willkommen zur
Welcome to the press conference of I'm Your Man here during this very extraordinary 71st Berlinale Film Festival. We're very pleased that so many of you joined us here from, well, your homes, as it were, and we are all freshly tested here in the cinema, and we're very happy to be able to meet here, and that at least we can be in the cinema here. Now, let me introduce our panel here. Let me start with the director, Maria Schrader. Welcome, great to have you here. And the screenplay author, Jan Schumburg. And Maren Eggert is the lead role sitting right next to me. Great to have you here. And although LA is still asleep, we could convince Dan to join us online. Dan Stevens, welcome. And the producer is also here. Lisa Blumenberg. And let me start with a question to Maria right away. I know that there is a short story based on which you developed this movie, but perhaps you can tell us what really caught your eye with a view to these motives. You know, someone gets an artificial human being and that is supposed to be the perfect partner. Well, it actually really started, when I heard about this short story by Emma Wasławski that was supposed to be then turned into a film. And I only knew that there was a woman who would meet a robot man. And it sounded like a love story right away. It sounded a bit like the traditional boy meets girl, although it was the other way around. You know, girl meets boy, girl meets a robot boy. And that triggered both of my fantasy and it tickled my interest. And because, let's say, the inversion itself was interesting, the thing, as we just heard it in the brief trailer here, that the machine, for once, was not the woman, because it apparently was about, a machine, an automaton that could be developed to such a degree that it's not just a kind of an object that offers certain services, but could really operate at eye level and could become a partner for human beings. And that, in a world where we are now constantly surrounded by algorithms, guided by algorithms, where we even have humanoid robots, like the famous Sophia that was invited by Angela Merkel and who had an appearance in front of the United Nations. I thought that this was an idea that really fits in with our times and that at the same time raises questions that we may not yet have the answers to. A question to Jan as the author. Now, you were tasked with developing these figures, and one was, as opposed to many other scenarios, not a human. And how do you write what a robot would do? I mean, you would have to use an entirely different approach, right? Yes, of course, but, you are inventing someone who is also performing for someone in a certain sense. I thought that he could perhaps even answer a lot quicker, but, we had to add that, he looks like he's thinking about things so that he appears more human because he's someone who's just pretending to be human after all. But, we're all knowing that he's not a human being. And that is, I think, that leads to a lot of the, comic elements, the comedy elements in that movie. And of course, it's also great fun to write or develop someone who initially is always wrong and then slowly but surely improves his performance because, we may know that from human relationships, from love relationships, that in the beginning, you might have, might be thinking, oh, why did I say this or that? And then you, over time, find out how to really build a connection. This is the kind of field of tension, between the being as a human being and algorithms. It was great fun to write that. Thank you. A question to Maren. Now, you are playing that role of a woman who's rather skeptical with a view to the whole test, and she doesn't really want to participate in that, but then she's more or less forced to do it. And this is something that I'd like to know from all of you. What's your personal take on that? Would you actually participate in such a test? And can you understand why your role actually decided to then do it? Well, you just have to imagine that. You have a humanoid robot that you don't know anything about, except for the fact that he's programmed, specifically for your needs, and you take them home, and that is not just strange, but you may even be afraid of that. And I think it's understandable that you would think it's an unpleasant situation. It's a very logical conclusion. And for me, that means that I would have to think very hard about, having someone convince me to participate in that. That was very interesting. And a major part of that role of Alma that I found so interesting is, how she meets this kind of artificial intelligence and how she deals with that. And I can't really give you a clear answer here, but the journey that I have, with my role in that movie, that was a very interesting journey and a beautiful journey. So it's very difficult for me to now say that I wouldn't do it here. But thankfully, we're not really yet confronted with this situation. I would do it right away. But a question to Dan. Now you're playing that robot, a robot who actually still has to learn, I don't know what he already has, programmed in it, but how is it to play someone who's not a human being?
Well, it's interesting that bridge between what he's pre-programmed with, the algorithm that's been calibrated, by Alma, but also, these moments where he is very much performing the role of a human doing this in this situation. And then there's the Tom that must be learned. So in the interpersonal relations with Alma, he's improving or trying to improve. And so each situation, it was looking at, well, is this a pre-program that he's running here? Is this something he knows how to do? Or is this something he has to learn how to do and how to be better? And it was constantly with Maria, we were playing between those two things.
Und auch noch eine Frage an Lisa als Produzentin.
And a question to Lisa, the producer. Now, what is it that you thought was interesting about the whole, complex of, the whole subject matter, really? And well, first of all, it's really interesting, how this whole thing came about, because it is based on an initiative by the public broadcasting stations NDR and SWR, and they had the idea to, talk to authors of novels or, short stories, and that they should develop a short story about the near future, and then to collaborate with people from the movie industry. And these short stories were then also published in the Surkamp editing house, or publishing house rather, as an anthology. And the editorial office of the SWR picked two of these short stories, one of which was this short story by Emma Weslavsky. And that is how the whole thing really got started, or how they approached me. I was called by Manfred Hattendorf, and he's working with the SWR public broadcasting station. And, when I heard about the subject matter and when I then read the short story, I was instantly on fire, really. I was enthusiastic about it, and it was great to get this package, with Maria and Jan, and to be able to then come up with the whole package for the movie. Okay, let's now open up the press conference if there are any questions. Can you see whether there are any questions now? Okay, first of all, thank you so much for doing this press conference. You're the only ones during this Berlinale, and thanks for this great movie. It really is impressive. I've got two questions to Maria. First of all, why did you pick Dan Stevens as the main role? Are British people the better robots? And secondly, why the Pergamon Museum? Of course, it's great. We're not allowed to enter it. You could even do a film there. But why did you have the idea to do the movie in that museum? Well, Dan Stevens is for sure the best robot that I could have ever even dreamed of. And I'm so happy about this collaboration that right from the start was very special indeed, because Dan and myself, we met via Zoom. There was no physical meeting until he arrived in Berlin and we actually started our work. So I think that Jan and myself, when doing the screenplay, when developing the screenplay, we had the idea, when we wrote the role of Tom, that it would be nice, this story, as opposed to the short story, it was now, put into this present time, not into the future. And we're not really using that much artificial intelligence, so to speak. We wanted to have a real human being, an actor who together with the audience convinces them to be a robot. And we thought it would be great if that actor, could also, be a bit of a stranger, to start with. And so we really looked abroad for people who were able to speak German well enough to be able to, actually reproduce these complicated texts that Dan now had to speak, and who also looks great. And of course, that it's a particular kind of fun to have someone who looks like Dan in that ballroom in the initial scenes, who has this he reminds us of these very traditional male roles, but is then being turned into an object, is being treated as a machine, but who is also, equipped with enough self-irony and who enjoys, portraying the Tom in a way that shows us that sometimes he doesn't know what step to take next. And he also allows us not to forget that he's a machine, but still he's charming enough for us to fall in love with him. And that's why I'm so happy that we were actually able to get Dan to play that role. This was a very long answer to a short question, but it's really a very important point for this movie. And now, as to the Pergamon Museum, well, Jan and myself, we asked ourselves, what Alma would be working, what kind of job she'd have. And we thought, wouldn't it be interesting if she were an anthropologist doing research in human beings? And, there is this very, haptic element to her doing research in this cuneiform writings, and she's looking after, she's looking for metaphors and poetry in these very early writings. And the Pergamon Museum is actually closed. Major parts of the museum have been closed now, but we were familiar with it, and we asked those who were responsible whether we could shoot the film there. And I think we were the first film team ever to really do a movie in that great hall of the Pergamon Museum. And it is a very powerful and fantastic imagery that we could create there. That the future embodied by Tom is there, standing in front of human history, a portal that's thousands of years old and that had been used as a stage in the past. And he's fascinated, and both of our lead characters actually climb up to the portal. They have to, and they were allowed to actually step onto that portal. And we had lots of discussion beforehand. And that's then where the machine and the human being exchange their first kiss, under the roof of the past, so to speak. Very great. Well, but, it's a question now coming back to the cuneiform and poetry. Maria, is there really research into the question as to whether there was poetry when the people were still using cuneiform writings? Yes, indeed. And I have to say that, we actually made that up. It was a rather spontaneous thing. Yes, we really had to write our screenplay, and we didn't really had that much time. And, they say fake it till you make it. So we started thinking about what she might be working. And then we said, okay, cuneiforms. And then you do a bit of research, and then you think about what that might lead to. And then sometimes even when writing the screenplay, you are being gifted with these tiny elements, that you find out that the things that you just made up actually exist in real life. And I just have to tell you a brief story from that Pergamon Museum, because, with a view to Berlin museums, we were absolutely ignorant, it turned out. So you were in the wrong museum? No. It was a very embarrassing moment, really, for us, because I was sitting together with Elisa and together with the directors of the museum there, the Middle Eastern department there, and we asked them, well, do you have cuneiform exhibits here in the Pergamon? And then we got to hear that they are the foremost center of cuneiform research in the world. And as Jan just said, that's one of those little gifts that you get along the way. And then we were actually given the opportunity to talk to the experts in order to, cross-check whatever we thought of. And surprisingly, we were absolutely spot on. There is research in poetry, in cuneiform writings. And, you know, we then were also able to use these exhibits that are up to 5,000-year-olds in our movie. Well, see, I didn't know anything about that. But now we have our next guest, our next colleague here. I don't know, can you hear me? Yes. Great. Well, I have a question to Dan Stevens. You are playing the role of the robot with a lot of self-irony, and you seem to enjoy it a lot. And despite the fact that Tom is being treated very poorly by his partner, although he is supposed to know everything about her secret desires. Now, when playing that role, what did that to you and to your sense of masculinity? And have you learned anything about how to treat women?
That's a very good question. Yes, I mean it's an interesting role from the perspective of humankind, like how would we be in this situation, and what kind of human being should Tom be, but also what kind of man should Tom be. And I think that's a very, very important question, you know, and it's been in the zeitgeist, really. You know, how can men be better? And I think in this film, in our very particular situation, it's very specific to Tom. How can I be better in this situation? How can I make a better cup of coffee? How can I make her house look better? How can I make her life better? You know, and I think these are all very, very important questions. And when you take them into the microcosm, they become very funny. But if you sort of extrapolate them into society as a whole, I think they're very, very important questions. And that's why Tom was quite so fun to play, because it was going between these big philosophical questions and the sort of the minutiae of the comedy.
Dankeschön. Gibt's noch eine nächste
Thank you very
Frage?
much.
How did you choose to show people what human humor was? This is for Maria, I guess. How did you choose to illustrate human humor by showing them falling, the video of all the failings? You show people tripping and falling off of ladders. I know that's humor, and I know Freud thought humor came from human failings, but you're trying to teach what is human sense of humor. Why do people laugh at the failings of humans? How did you choose to use that idea?
Also es ist erst einmal natürlich
Well,
Tom.
first of all, it is, of course, Tom, who in that situation is trying to delve into the human condition. He wants to know what can be funny about epic fails. And quite apparently, the woman sitting next to him can't really explain it to him in detail either. And I think that there are different situations in this movie where you then actually also, you know, are looking into something of a mirror as a human being, you know, looking through the eyes of Tom. And then you also realize that humankind sometimes is acting very strangely indeed. There are, you know, a few situations where the movie is, you know, taking a different kind of, or an unexpected turn, like the epic fails, you know, it's like a piece of candy that's served in between, you know, or when Alma is sitting on her balcony in the evening and watches this tiny micro-civilization of ants. And also because of the fact that Tom is there in her flat, she may, you know, have a different perception of these tiny animals suddenly. And so this is how these things are related. And then there are also, you know, the deer in the woods that can't smell and detect Tom. And that is how in that movie, the machine connects to nature, and the human beings are outside watching this kind of sensation. But of course, self-evidently, it is a major question. You know, human beings are social beings, and they are looking for their partners. And, you know, can someone who is not quite as imperfect as we are, someone who can't die, who won't, you know, be ill, who's not driven by instincts or jealousies or fears, can that be a person that offers, you know, consolation? Is that someone who we can actually have a partnership with? Thank you. Is there a next question? David Corby would be next. We can't see you, but we can hear you. Okay, perhaps it's better that way. No, it's too late. Now we can see you. Yeah, I apologize for that. I have a question concerning the first non-gender award that was supposed to be given out this year at the Berlinale. And what does Maren think about that? And what does our robot think about that? Wouldn't he be the best person to actually receive that non-gender award? You know, because, you know, the question is he a man, a woman, or a robot? Thank you. Hello. I mean, I thought that it was a great decision to say that we would have an award that is gender independent. I mean, there is a major discussion going on in the field of theater and movies, and, you know, the question of who is allowed to play which role, who has to have which kinds of, you know, experiences. You know, could I play a lesbian if I'm not a lesbian woman, just as an example, you know? I think it's a very interesting and a very timely discussion. It's really necessary. And that's why I think that the decision to have such an award is very fitting. Thank you. And to Dan, the same question.
I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's a hallmark of one of the great film festivals of the world, and one of the great forward-thinking cities of the world, that they are among the first to do this. I'm sure the robot community are up in arms about me playing this role, but that's something I'll have to tackle in the coming weeks and months.
Thanks. Die nächste Frage bitte, wenn wir eine haben.
Okay, the next question, please. Peter Klaus from DPA. Okay, wonderful movie. I agree with all the others. I have a question to Ms. Eggert and Ms. Schrader, and my questions are rather similar. But what I found really great is this very fine balance between this, you know, humor, the subtle humor, and the great tragic elements. So I would like to know from Ms. Eggert whether it was hard to play that, and to the director, did you then work more on editing, or did you have everything down before you did that? Well, thank you very much. I mean, that is something that I found fascinating about the whole story right from the beginning. I mean, you read the screenplay and you actually, of course, instantly see that these are the opposite poles here in that story. You know, there is this element of levity, you know, the comedic part that we also try to give a lot of room for. And then you've got this longer scenes with the great dialogues that are greatly, really well written. And there you could really delve a little deeper into the story and the underlying ideas. And I think this is really what characterizes this movie. It is really very close to the original idea, and still it remains an entertaining movie, I hope. It's so great to hear you talk about the movie like that. Well, you know, I think that the foundation stone really is to be found in the screenplay. You know, those are the major decisions that you take, you know, when you start the work, and then we go further into the details later on. Perhaps you can also say something about that, Jan, later. We had very, very long discussions, you know, about how to start the movie, for example, you know, the company that is, you know, actually from the future, if you will, you know, that is a company that wants to present its new sensational product here in Berlin, and wants to get full marketing authorization for their prototype, Tom, and that they actually, you know, start the whole thing with a very retro kind of, you know, ballroom scene, and not, you know, just a slick hotel lobby or something that you can find anywhere in the world. So that was a funny thing to start with, you know. And we also thought that Dan, in his first appearance, would also then go onto the dance floor and would dance there, you know, like in imagination, you know, childlike imagination, how robots would be dancing, you know, and that he would then have that glitch, you know, that he would freeze, if you will. So that as an idea, I think, is a great example of the humor we try to present, you know, if it works. But you never know that before. Would you like to say something about that? Well, I think, and it's been mentioned already, I think that the sense of humor, you know, and what people find funny can be found in, the failures and the ineptitude of people. And that is also what's happening in the beginning, when Dan is, or rather the robot is doing things that are just plain wrong, or out of place, that are inappropriate in certain situations. And for me, the shift towards the tragic happens when the perfection is, doing something to us that makes us, feel sad or melancholic, because we find out that what we perceive as human-like, then we also at the same time find out that there might be a being that's even better at that than we are. And the last remaining thing that we would have is imperfection, idiocy, the irrational and the stupid things. And that is also, something that changed how I perceive humankind ever since, in the sense that, whatever is idiotic about human beings, I find more lovable and more likable, actually. And just one last thing that I would like to say about that humor and the scenes that are, filled with humor. And of course, it's also Maren and Dan, we have to thank them for, their incredible performance, because they've got this bandwidth, Maren is, just so open about, getting involved in the different situations. And when we met during the casting process, I found out how many different faces she can have and how quickly she can move from one state to the next. She can be very strict or very chaotic. She can appear to be devoid of any sense of humor or, a very funny person. And, and it really, just as Dan said a moment ago, both with Maren as well as with Dan, when shooting the film at the set, it was like turning a knob, if you will, just, adding a bit more of the machine or, being more naturalistic. And the same holds true for Maren. So we tried to find the right levels for all of these things. And we also created a lot of material that way that, as you just rightly asked, was then worked on by Hans-Jörg Weisbrich during the editing process. And he really is a great expert, and he finely tuned everything. And that is a very important and was a very important phase for this movie, in post-production and in editing. Lots of things happened there as well. Thank you. The next question.
I speak a bit of German, but my God, Dan, I'm from Australia, Helen Barlow from the Australian newspaper. But Dan, where on earth did you learn that German? It's and I speak German, so I can be a little bit more knowledgeable than a lot of English speakers. And have you lived in Berlin? I lived in Berlin for 4 years just after the wall came down, and it was amazing. Tell us about your German experiences and making this German film.
Yeah, I studied German at school and continued it a little bit at university. My parents actually had great friends who lived in Bielefeld. And so we used to spend a lot of our holidays in Nordrhein-Westfalen. And that's really where I learnt my German. I did a film here 12 years ago about Hildegard Knef, playing an Englishman who spoke German. Yeah, this was the first time I'd been called upon since to wheel it out, I suppose. But it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. And I think, actually, as Maria was saying, the foreign element of Tom, I think it was a really interesting choice to go for a foreign actor who could perhaps get their mouths around the words, because it does bring this extra uncanny foreign element to the role. And I was delighted. There was something about it that really helped, I think, with portraying Tom was just this constant mental engagement. I would go home at the end of the day and be completely mentally exhausted by just everything that was going on in my brain, receiving instruction from Maria, but also just, playing the role and just dealing with everything, day to day in German. It was an amazing experience.
Thank you. Die nächste Frage.
Von Marius.
The next question by Marius Zegri from Radio Bremen. In the credits, I saw that you had a corona commissioner on set. And because of that virus, we're sitting at home. Berlinale is taking place in a digital format because of the virus. How was that for you in real life to shoot a movie under these coronavirus conditions? How difficult was that? What were the particular problems? Well, we did our movie in August and September last year, and as compared to today, it was almost paradise-like, numbers in terms of the cases. But of course, it was an extreme challenge for all the different industries, and in particular for the film industry. And there were very detailed and sophisticated hygienic concepts with, social distancing, different clusters within the team. And of course, we had an almost daily testing regime, without which we couldn't have done that. And at the same time, there was, of course, a certain risk for the producers as well, because, no insurance in this world would pay or, would offer you an insurance for the case of a pandemic. But I think that the movie industry has adapted rather well. But I remember during the first lockdown, when we were all out of our depth, and overtaxed by this new situation, there were no tests available and so on. And we then had to take decisions, about shooting the movie, yes or no. And I said, well, this is a love story. And we have to have, situations and scenes that tell us how human beings get closer to each other. And we have to be able to do that. Otherwise, we will have to postpone the movie. But then we really very quickly learned how to deal with the situation. And then, of course, the testing situation improved, and, and we got more information about the virus itself. So in a very brief amount of time, there was an incredible increase in know-how, if you will, so that it became possible. And I think that we did rather well. And was that something that you thought about even while writing the screenplay? Did you have to incorporate into your work? Well, we were sitting at the same desk, weren't we? No. When writing the script, we never even thought about that, That we wrote the screenplay way ahead of Corona, really. And I would also like to add something. Just a moment ago, I mentioned the ballroom scene. Looking back, it really is something of a sensation that we were able to do that. And so I have to really publicly thank Lisa and head of production, Martin Rohrbeck. I have to thank them for, making this possible, because it meant so much additional work. You just have to imagine that was a closed room. We didn't even have windows there, so we couldn't open the windows. We had 70 to 80 people that were assembled there, who are not really sitting there with a distance like we are here. They are dancing, they're kissing, they're flirting. And that means that we had to go and find real life couples who could also play in that situation, play a role. So it was really a major effort involved here. And looking back, I am really proud of that. That was, of course, the day or the 2 days of shooting that we were most afraid of. And because we had to interrupt before that, for 2 days, because we had false positive tests in our team. And that, of course, costs a lot of money. And so, when we shot those scenes, we put that at the very end of our filming schedule. And when it then really happened and you stepped into that room, it was really, it was an unseen, a sight unseen. There was something that was really not imaginable. It was at the end of September, and you hadn't really experienced something like that for such a long time. We had a band there. I mean, you saw the movie. It was sensational. It was like we were celebrating life as if there was no tomorrow and as if there was no Corona. So that was really great that we could make it that way. Yes, and I'm envious just listening to you. Next question, if we have another question, by Sergei Gavrilov.
Nice to see you all at Berlinale.
Nice to see you.
And I think sometimes people expect the partners to behave like androids. For example, they will fully meet expectations. But in my opinion, Maria, you showed us that a real union is possible when there is a sum of two individuals.
Could you rephrase this question, please, for us?
The same individuals, or
At my opinion, Maria showed us that a real union is possible when there is a sum of two individuals, when people doing something unusual, something unpredictable.
yes, I think. Entschuldigung. Was natürlich auch so.
Well, yes, and what was really special here, and what might also have contributed to the sense of humor, and what towards the end really also allowed Alma to actually fall in love in this story, is that although she might reject him and reject the whole notion of a machine, you know, an individual that only ever exists to fulfill her wishes and desires. I mean, she's absolutely strictly opposed to the very concept, but she is still very attentive. She's watching him, you know, with eagle's eyes. And as Marin just said, you know, it has this, you know, slightly creepy note, the fact that he's in her flat and that she's locking her bedroom door, you know, and that nothing of that union is a dialogue or based on a dialogue that she would have with a normal human being. She doesn't know what to expect. And, you know, when she tells him that she's not even looking for love and that she's part of the experts team that's supposed to test him, you know, there she's trying to put some distance between them because she doesn't know what will happen and whether he might be dangerous to a degree. And we're all, of course, influenced by these stories that take a different kind of turn and that end up in destruction or, you know, a struggle with the machine, you know, the creature that was invented by human beings. And I think that this kind of attitude of both figures, you know, Tom, you know, just wants to know what he can do in order to make Alma happy. And Alma just wants to know, who is that person? How can I deal with him? How can I communicate with him? And that, of course, you know, allows for all the different possibilities and also the possibility of a rediscovery, if you will. Because you allow for all the possibilities, you know, you create the space for all the possibilities. And that is also, you know, the difference as to how you would deal with a human blind date. Okay, and Tom Westerholt from Deutschlandfunk.
So, hat es funktioniert? Könnt ihr mich sehen und hören?
Does it work? Can you see and hear me? Yes? Okay, great. So, a question also to Maria. Now, it was the algorithm that you were dealing with primarily, you know, the algorithm that then also matches the couples. And we know that from dating apps nowadays. And you're very sarcastic in, even cynical in the way that you deal with the question of the algorithm. But I asked myself, you know, in this day and age, you know, without cinemas, for example, I mean, we've got similar algorithms at the streaming websites, you know, where they propose to us movies that they assume would like to watch. And this kind of sarcasm and cynicism, would you also expand that onto those kinds of algorithms, you know, from the perspective of a movie-making person, you know, that there are so many instances that tell us what we purportedly like or love? Well, let me just publicly admit here that, you know, this pre-selection that I'm being presented with, you know, I always react to that with a lot of antagonism. I find it very hard to bear. And sometimes I, you know, just deliberately click on entirely different things. and ask myself whether they will perceive that, whether they will register that, and whether next time round I will be offered, I don't know, soft porn or, whatever. So I myself react to this kind of automated proposal. Sometimes it's like they're trying to dictate things. I rebel against that. And is that also one of the reasons why Alma reacts to that? Is that the same kind of rage underneath, that you react to this kind of proposal? Well, yes, of course, you're being reflected back by someone and you keep thinking, oh my goodness, he knows so many things about me, although it might be a machine, but who can stand, getting reflected back their own weaknesses? I think it's really a strong suit of Alma's to, deal with the criticism that he's, mentioning, that she can actually deal with this kind of criticism, that she's not just trying to fend it off, but that she's trying to deal with that. And that is also the basis for getting closer to him, that he is able to say these things and that she is able to accept them and to deal with these forms of criticism, and to also be able to live with the fact that he's reflecting back at her what she really is. Okay.
Super.
Does it work now? Great. Okay. So thank you very much, first of all, for this movie. It is one of the highlights, and I've seen 5 already. So my question today is about the role of the city of Berlin. For me, as a viewer, this city, plays an important role in the story itself. And it's not just the city of Berlin as it is, but also as it's being shown and the lighting that you're using. So my question to the whole team is, these scenes that you were shooting in the city, how did you plan those in terms of also the camera work? And I also have a question to Dan and Maren. Did the city actually help you, if you will, to embody your characters? Was there an extra kind of atmospheric influence, if you will? Well, thank you very much for your kind words about Berlin. Of course, there are so many individual decisions that come into play, but what was very important from the very beginning was the flat that Alma lives in. So our production designer and the cameraman, we had very similar ideas, that she would be living in a typical Berlin house, which is not one of those older buildings, that are so typical of Berlin. And most people would assume that perhaps, an academic like Alma would be living in such an older building. But we thought, that, corresponding to the romanticism of this movie, she might have a great view, that she would be living on a higher floor. And we also selected one of those, we call them Plattenbau, prefab buildings that are also typical of Berlin, but it's right in the city center. And the Futurium as location, that was also one of the first locations that allowed us to shoot there. That was also one of the gifts that come along, just like the Pergamon Museum. At the Futurium, that embodies not just modernity, but also the future. There we even thought about whether this could be the headquarters of that company, where Sandra Hüller is then welcoming Alma. But then we decided to use this as the location of the university, because it also shows Alma doing her anthropological and academic work, and with dusting off that work, if you will, people might otherwise perceive these people as bookworms and, dealing just with the very old things from the past. But here the Pergamon Museum actually is a representation of her research and the thousands of years of human history. And then we've got this great modernist entrance of the gallery. James Simon Gallery, that's the name. And then there are those moments where you see all those images next to each other, you know, that you might have taken pictures of, and then you try to put them onto film the best possible way. And we wanted to have a simple and clear cinematic language that should also be timeless. And we were also very happy to find locations in Berlin that had not yet been shown in so many other films. Well, I would also like to offer you an answer because that was such a nice question. You know, Berlin in the summer month is really so beautiful, just as beautiful as it is ugly in the winter month. But, you know, there were those summer nights where I was allowed then to just walk across squares or climb some stairs in a in a summer night, and everything is beautiful. It is warm. You feel like you're floating through the warm air, and it's really hard to describe, really. And as an actor, of course, it's always about the space that you're playing in, no matter how large or small it is. And it really helped a lot. Perhaps not for defining your character, but in terms of the atmosphere, yes. Thanks. And Dan, would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, I think it's a city that very visibly deals with history and the future alongside each other. And there are some beautiful, beautiful shots in this film of, particularly outside the Pergamon, where you have is it the James Simon? Did you say the gallery?
Yes.
The very, very modern alongside the beautifully old. And I think it really, I remember, looking for that moment where Tom is capable of experiencing awe, which is a very human thing. There's no need for robots to feel awe about anything, I don't think, apart from maybe themselves. And there was something about that epic sense of historical scale and the future that really gave, I think, a wonderful backdrop to work in and amongst, and really kind of gave Tom something to think about.
Dankeschön. Ich glaube, wir haben noch Zeit für eine letzte Frage.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. Okay, Sigrid Fischer from WDR, Public Broadcaster.
Hört man mich?
Can you hear me?
Ja, man hört sie. Bild haben wir nicht.
Yes, okay, so I don't have an image, and well, I taped off my camera. So my question goes back to what you mentioned about streaming, and this is to Maria Schrader. But you also did a very nice mini-series that goes into the world via Netflix. So there is also a positive side to that. But how big was your hope to be able to beat the chess-playing women out of the game there? Well, when talking about awards, I think that they are just, the pinnacle for the things that you already experience with movies or series that you did. And to get a double nomination for the Golden Globe was a sensation in itself. And apart from that, I think you should just be happy if things work out. And you should also be happy if things don't work out like that, because you are partaking in that race. And on top of that, it's just one big game, isn't it? And so what you're saying, of course, is also right, that the algorithms also help spread and distribute television series. But the most important or, beautiful things, I think, about Unorthodox was that it helped us get into regions that might not have been looking for this kind of story, but were rather surprised about that because, we were not just very successful in the Western world, we were among the top 10 in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, in Iran. And we got feedback, rather surprising feedback from entirely different cultural and religious backgrounds. And we realized, that this was a surprising series for these areas of the world and that helped open doors and build bridges. And that's an extremely wonderful experience. Right, so building bridges towards the end, that is very nice. As a closing word, I can't tell the time, but I've got, do we still have time for another question? Jing-Sang? Okay, so let's allow for one last question.
Hello, could you hear me? I have a question for Maria, Maren, and Dan. It's about the final part, the evaluation report Amma wrote. She is against the robot as a replacement of the human partner. And I want to ask what's the viewpoint of the director and the two actors about the definition of partnership and the indispensable element of being a partner. And also, what will the future of partnership become like? Actually, in many places, like in Japan, many people are living without a real partner, like with sex toy, like in the film Outdoor. The main actor prefer a outdoor without heart instead of a real girlfriend, which takes him a lot of time. So I want to know a bit more about your opinions on this topic, partnership today and future. Thank you.
Ich, ne?
Ja.
Ich denke, dass
Well, I
wir
think that we quite deliberately looked at this conflict that Alma finds herself in towards the end of the movie, and we selected this kind of conflict, this contradiction to, on the one hand, write that expert's opinion, her evaluation, and where she says that she's against allowing someone like Tom into society, to allow them to work, to marry, and to perhaps even have children one day. I mean, that was not something that we covered. But on the other side of things, she travels to meet him. She is already hooked. She's already dependent on him, as she called it. And I don't really have a final question here, a final answer here, I'm sorry. But I think it's highly interesting to ask ourselves these questions. I can't really assess or evaluate or perhaps even condemn someone marrying a puppet. Even Oskar Kokoschka, the painter, had one of his models being rebuilt as a puppet. And every form or every way of improving life and of improving your quest for happiness, no matter what kind of form it takes, is welcome, right? And in some circumstances, as Jan already alluded to, there is, or rather, in these circumstances, Alma writes that evaluation that way because she already assumes that Tom might be the better human being, more civilized, free of aggression, more altruistic, and with a lot of attention based on love, for their counterparts. Well, it really is a very complex question that you could think about for a very long time and talk about quite a bit. But personally, while shooting the film and when watching the movie afterwards, I thought about whether what Alma is experiencing, whether it would be difficult if she imagined things to be different. That is a very interesting experiment of thought, really, because it leads to the question of what experience really is. How much does it have to do with who I am? How much does it have to do with the person on the other side? Is experience just what is happening inside of me, or is it based on what I'm projecting onto the other part? So this is really very, very interesting, and that's why we could really think about this endlessly. Dan?
Well, it's a very human question, and I think one of the reasons that that we keep coming back to stories like this and why our algorithms keep suggesting films like Ich bin dein Mensch is that love is so irrational, and we can look for all the rational reasons why we should be with them. We can tick the checklist of things, but actually, going back throughout human history, all of our romantic stories are, I can't love her, I shouldn't love her, but I do, and against my silly heart, I this is how I feel, and I think it's that question that sort of keeps it within the human realm. And it's sort of what Alma does. You know, she writes up her report and says, no, this is, you know, logically, this doesn't make any sense. But she goes to Denmark and she goes to find Tom, and it's rather lovely.
Vielen Dank. So, steht da jetzt irgendwo 16 Uhr?
Thank you very much. Does the clock say 4 o'clock now? Because I'm rightly assuming that the time is over. So let's hope that the algorithm will propose this film time and again until everyone's seen it. Thank you very much for all of you for joining us. Thanks for the questions as well. And thanks to Dan in LA. This was the press conference on I'm Your Man. Ich bin dein Mensch.